Professor Scott Lucas, University College Dublin, is joining us right now to tackle, I would say, this difficult topic. So I think that we can say that there is corruption in the European Parliament, right? The question is how widespread it is and what can we do about it, right? I believe that a while back, Roberta Metsola was trying to sort of make at least her income, right, more transparent. She was disclosing all this. Professor Lucas, so what can be done?
I think it's an important topic because corruption, receiving payoffs, negotiating influence for money or for other benefits, that's common in almost every national government, as well as the European Parliament, not just simply an EU issue. And I think it's important also to note, let's take the report that you just had, that you need to get into the details of what has happened or what is being alleged. So, it's kind of dramatic when you say like 1/4 of MEPs have been involved supposedly in some type of activity, scandalous activity, which could include a corruption. That report, which is at the end of January, which very comprehensive report, but in some cases it was very minor. So for example, you have an Estonian MP who once was fined because he had kept a smartphone, sold a smartphone that he had found while he was working for a ferry company rather than turning it in. And you might say that's wrong, but that's not as much as a serious offense as you might say at the other end of the scale. A Greek MEP, Yanis Logos, who has been in prison for 14 years for running a criminal organization and is still an MEP from prison. And then you also have to distinguish between what, we have found are confirmed cases of corruptions and allegations. And while Pfizergate makes very, very dramatic headline, and while there are those who say, oh, you must sack Ms. von der Leyen, who, of course, is facing the question of whether she'll be reelected as the European Council leader, that's much different than having it confirmed that von der Leyen was in fact, as it were, definitely guilty of, giving Pfizer advantages during the COVID-19 crisis. So all of that is there in the mix. And your starting point for all of this is transparency. Whether it's national or EU level, you need to have a system which is transparent, in which all legislators have to declare their interest. They have to declare their income from those interests. They have to declare the people with whom they have had dealings involving those interests so that those interests can be scrutinized to make sure that they're above board. Where you run into real problems is where you don't have that transparency, where you don't have a system where everything is above board, because then, of course, we have the opportunities for corruption, but we also have the opportunities for rumors and whispers of what might or might not be corruption.
Right. So where does this, I believe you're somewhat referring to the Foreign Influence Directive, something that Georgia has been using, the Georgian Dream Party has been using to justify its own foreign agent bill there in Georgia. We know that these two are vastly different. Here in European Union, it's supposed to be focused on lobbying within the European Union and whatnot. Do you think that directive is going to play a crucial role in transparency?
No, I think we need to distinguish in terms of the measures we talk about to try to ensure this transparency. So the starting point, let's not talk about foreign agents to start off with. Let's just simply talk about any dealing that an MEP has with a company, with a media organization, with an individual who gives them a benefit. This is actually the UK system, which is not perfect by the least, and has been abused. But it is the UK system, which is called the Registry of Interest. Now, that, I think, is a pretty good starting point in terms of laying down the foundation of getting the information out there. And you have to make sure that, of course, that MEPs are truthful about the information they provide. What you're asking about is beyond that. And what you're asking about is foreign entities who might be involved in connections with MEPs. And I want to say from the start that while you have certain legislation you can look to, like the US Act, which is the Foreign Agent Registration Act, FARA, when you talk about the Georgian Act, the question of what the Georgian legislature did, whether that was actually there to ensure transparency in terms of the dealings of legislators with foreign interest, or whether they were using that legislation to try to crush dissent and to crush civil activism.
Oh yeah, I'm not justifying it in any which way or form. I'm just referring to the European Union directive that has been taken completely out of context by the Georgians. I'm trying to establish whether that actually has a place within the European Parliament and whether it's going to provide that transparency that we're looking at in complete juxtaposition to the Georgian foreign influence bill.
Thank you. Yeah, to be clear with that, I think that, again, the EU, let's treat that as not legislation that we're looking at to crush dissent in civil society. I think, again, you always have to review that question of how you register foreign entities, how you monitor foreign entities, and again, how you report on those foreign entities that are involved. Now, many of those foreign entities will be NGOs. And NGOs, non-governmental organizations, on the surface will claim, look, we're not there to make profit. We're not there to benefit from deals with MEPs. We're there to represent certain issues. But you still have to be above board on the issues that they're talking about, in part to ensure that you don't get adverse foreign influence, such as you cited in your report. We know that Russia, for example, is trying to manipulate, is trying to, in some cases, buy off MEPs as part of their political and propaganda warfare over their invasion of Ukraine.
Right, Professor Lucas, but don't you think that the problem sort of starts on the domestic level? Of course, we're going to vote on, in case of Poland, on June 9th, but then we have these candidates pre-selected for us, right, by political parties operating in the country, right? So is perhaps there's some sort of, bias in terms of what kind of candidates these people are. On the Polish example, without just naming names, we know of some controversial people, controversial from the start, right, who are running for the European Parliament.
I think this runs from country to country. So let me talk about what is now my home country in Ireland, which is you have some candidates who are being put up by the established political parties, who have been around for a century, but you have some candidates who are being put up by newer parties, who are, for example, highlighting environmental issues, highlighting the issues of farmers, as you mentioned, highlighting other issues, economic issues. And then you have many candidates here in Ireland who are independents, who have no obvious tie to a party. So I think in the domestic level, which you're quite right to highlight, it's really important that voters have as much information as they can possibly get about those individuals who are being put forward. Not just about what they stand for, the issues that they stand for, but what is their background? What is their financial position? And is there any type of compromising, as it were, interests that they have that could affect their performance as an MEP? Now, will that be a perfect system? No. But again, the more information that the voting public has about the people who claim to represent them, that's a very good starting point to see that we get a better system to benefit all of us.
Right. So essentially vetting these candidates. It's not really being done at this point, at least not sufficiently, perhaps in all cases. Should the candidates be vetted, and by whom? Perhaps their own national intelligence service?
And here I think you run into a problem, and I'm going to take a very, let's say extreme example to illustrate the point. Mm-hmm. In the country of Iran, which I follow very closely, they are going into a presidential election right now. And they say, well, we vet every candidate to make sure that that person is worthy of being president. And what happens is that the Guardian Council, who are the vetters, who are the body that supposedly established legitimacy, they disqualify almost every candidate. And they only allow a few through. And of course, the ones they allow through are the ones that the Supreme Leader supports. So your problem with any type of vetting system, especially if it's vetting system through a government entity, is that you will always have the suspicion that the government is stacking the deck, that far from being very fair across the board, it will qualify those candidates who it likes to see win, and it will disqualify those candidates whom it sees as a threat.
So very slippery slope.
Professor Lucas, since you've mentioned both Ireland and, of course, now Iraq, let me ask you about a case study, right? Because we had these two Irish MEPs who headed to the headquarters of Hashd al-Shaabi Iranian-backed, Russian-allied militant organization in Iraq to criticize U.S. and European military action in Iraq. Of course, I'm sure you know who these people were, but I mean, my question is, did they have a bad rap on the national level? Was that a surprise? Could that be prevented, just sort of on this particular case study?
Well, the two MEPs who, and this is a matter of public record, so you're safe if I name them, are Mick Wallace and Claire Daly. They have a long history of being very critical of the U.S., being very critical of NATO, being very critical of the EU, including countries like Poland, and of being very supportive, not only of Iran, as you mentioned, but also of Russia. They support Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they supported the Assad regime's killing of its own civilians for years. Now, the question is, what do you do about that? Well, on the surface, a visit to these Iran-backed militias is not illegal. There's questions as you run into issues whether these two MEPs can be sanctioned. I won't talk about that at this point. That's a complex issue. But again, I come back to this, that the best check on this type of behavior, when you have MEPs who are supporting, let's say, the Russian invasion of Ukraine or supporting oppressive Middle Eastern regimes, comes down to the voters. So both Claire Daly and Mick Wallace face very serious challenges in terms of getting back into the European Parliament. Rather than having a government or a judge say, no, you can't run again because of what you've done, the best outcome for all of us would be in countries like Poland, and of being very supportive, not only of Iran, as you mentioned, but also of Russia. They support Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they supported the Assad regime's killing of its own civilians for years. Now, the question is, what do you do about that? Well, on the surface, a visit to these Iran-backed militias is not illegal. There's questions as you run into issues whether these two MEPs can be sanctioned. I won't talk about that at this point. That's a complex issue. But again, I come back to this, that the best check on this type of behavior, when you have MEPs who are supporting, let's say, the Russian invasion of Ukraine or supporting oppressive Middle Eastern regimes, comes down to the voters. So both Claire Daly and Mick Wallace face very serious challenges in terms of getting back into the European Parliament. Rather than having a government or a judge say, no, you can't run again because of what you've done, the best outcome for all of us would be if the voters say, we find this behavior unacceptable, and therefore we no longer support you.
And in a free and democratic society, it is the voters who decide. Scott Lucas, Professor Scott Lucas from the University College Dublin, thank you very much for joining us and discussing these issues.
Thanks to both of you.